My billionaire grandfather willed me his entire $4 billion inheritance. But before I share my story, please take a minute of your precious time to support our channel. Your support and love keeps us going. My name is Naomi Carter, and I'm 28 years old. If anyone had told me a decade ago that I would inherit my grandfather's business empire, an empire valued at nearly $4 billion, I would have laughed until I cried. At 18, my parents had shoved me out of their house with nothing but a second-hand duffel bag and a warning that I'd never make it without them. "You'll be crawling back," my mother sneered as my father crossed his arms like a judge pronouncing sentence. So picture the moment, 10 years later, when I walked into a courthouse and faced those very same parents, Anthony and Celeste Carter, dressed in flawless suits, their smiles as fake as glass. My older brother, Derek, sat beside them looking like he already owned the world. Celeste leaned in close, her expensive perfume so strong it clung to the air. She whispered, "Don't worry, Naomi, your father and I will handle everything for you." Anthony nodded, smug and certain, as though my future and $4 billion were already theirs. But then the judge turned the page of my grandfather's will, and in a single breath, the fantasy they'd built collapsed. Growing up, I lived in a home where image mattered more than love. My parents weren't poor, not even close. Dad worked as a senior manager at a transport firm, and Mom lived for charity luncheons, jewelry shows, and neighborhood chatter. They only valued the child who fit their ideal. That was Derek, the golden son. Straight-A student, varsity athlete, polished smile. Every achievement of his was celebrated like a national holiday. When Derek was accepted into his college of choice, Dad popped champagne. But when I won a local short story contest, Mom brushed it off with, "Cute, but that won't put food on the table." It wasn't that I was rebellious. I wasn't sneaking out or skipping school. I simply didn't fit their mold. I preferred sketching over sports, novels over fast cars, quiet evenings over loud parties. For that, I was labeled difficult. At 16, Derek was handed a brand new car. Meanwhile, I was catching rides with friends, patched together with embarrassment. When I asked why, Dad's jaw tightened as he told me, "Life isn't fair, Naomi. Learn your place." By 17, the house felt like a battlefield. Dinner was a silent war zone. Mom rolled her eyes at anything I said. Derek smirked over his plate, twirling his car keys like a trophy. And Dad? He looked at me as though I were a problem he couldn't wait to erase. One night, he leaned across the table, his voice sharp and final. "If you're still here at 18, you've failed." The words stung worse than a slap. I laughed outwardly, but inside I broke. And when my 18th birthday arrived, they kept their promise. It wasn't a quiet eviction. It was a performance. Mom summoned me into the living room like she was hosting a play. Derek lounged on the couch, smirking. Dad stood tall, holding an envelope. "It's time you learn responsibility," he said coldly. "No more money. No more help. You're on your own." Inside the envelope was nothing. No cash, no lifeline, just emptiness. I packed what little I had. 2 outfits, a worn sketchbook, and my phone. As I stood at the door, Mom called out in her sugary tone, "You'll thank us someday." That night, I curled up in the back seat of my old car, staring at the roof liner, wondering how my life had fallen apart so fast. Derek, meanwhile, posted pictures from his fraternity party, flashing the new laptop Dad had bought him. The only person who didn't abandon me was my grandfather, Henry Carter. He invited me over for dinner, let me crash on his couch when I had nowhere else to go. He rarely spoke of my parents, but his silence told me enough. Over time, he became more of a father than my own ever was. The years after leaving home blurred into survival. I scraped together part-time jobs, studied when I could, and finally managed to rent a shoebox apartment that smelled of paint and rust. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Through it all, Grandpa Henry never turned away. He'd slip me grocery money when he thought I wasn't watching, call me over for Sunday dinners, and grip my hand firmly, saying, "Naomi, you're stronger than you realize." So when the phone call came, my world cracked. Grandpa was gone. Even though I knew he'd been sick, I believed, stupidly, that he would outlast us all. Losing him felt like losing the last anchor in a storm. I expected nothing from his estate. Maybe a keepsake, a pocket watch, or a letter. So when the official envelope arrived, stamped with the probate court seal, my hands shook as I opened it. Inside, the words were simple. The heirs of Henry Carter are required to attend the reading of his will. My name appeared alongside my parents' and Derek's. Part of me wanted to stay home, to grieve in peace, but another part, the part Henry had nurtured, refused to let them write me out of his story. So on a gray Monday morning, I walked into the courthouse. They were already there, of course. My parents, Anthony and Celeste, looked more like they were heading to a gala than a will reading. Celeste's pearls glistened against her silk blouse, lipstick sharp red. Dad sat smug, his cufflinks flashing under the lights. And Derek? He looked like royalty awaiting coronation. His suit tailored, his grin wide, as if the empire was already his. When I stepped into the room, all three of them turned. Celeste's smile stretched too wide, honey-coated venom dripping from her voice. "Naomi, darling, I knew you'd come." Dad gave me a tight nod before his gaze darted back to the attorney's briefcase. Derek leaned back in his chair and muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "This'll be fun." I sat opposite them, my pulse hammering, the air heavy with tension. The attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Mr. Lawson, cleared his throat and began. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Henry Carter." Celeste's manicured hand brushed mine lightly, her nails pressing into my skin. "Don't worry, Naomi. Of course, we'll manage it for you." Dad nodded, smug as ever, already convinced the billions would fall neatly into their hands. But they had no idea what was about to strike them. The room hushed as Mr. Lawson flipped to the first page of the will. My parents leaned forward. Derek reclined like a prince waiting for his crown, and I gripped the edge of my chair until my fingers went numb. "This is the last will and testament of Henry Carter," Lawson read, his voice steady. I could almost hear my parents' script playing in their minds. Derek inherits the fortune. They manage it. I disappear into irrelevance. But then Lawson's next words cut through the air like lightning. "I, Henry Carter, do hereby leave the entirety of my estate, valued at approximately $4 billion, to my granddaughter, Naomi Carter." Time stopped. For a heartbeat, the entire room froze. My parents' smile shattered, their faces cracking like glass. Derek's jaw dropped before snapping shut with a click. "4 billion. To me." My heart pounded so loudly, I barely heard the attorney continue. "It is the deceased's express wish that this estate be left in her sole possession. No trustees, no oversight, no shared management. Effective immediately, Naomi Carter has full control of all assets, properties, and holdings." Silence fell heavy. Then, like vultures realizing their prey had escaped, my family scrambled. "Well, of course that makes sense," Celeste chirped too sweetly, clapping her hands. "Naomi was close to her grandfather. Naturally, she'll need our guidance. Isn't that right, Anthony?" Dad nodded quickly, his smile stretched thin. "Yes, yes. $4 billion is a tremendous responsibility for someone so inexperienced. We'll help her manage investments, oversee properties, protect her from mistakes." Derek chuckled under his breath, his tone sharp as broken glass. "No offense, sis, but you've never exactly been the responsible one. Remember maxing out that credit card freshman year? Multiply that by billions. Total disaster waiting to happen." Every word lashed me like a whip. Even now, after Henry had trusted me with everything, they still couldn't see me as capable. Mr. Lawson cleared his throat firmly. "To be clear, Mr. Carter specified the estate belongs solely to Naomi Carter. No trustees. No family oversight. No shared management. His instructions are explicit." Dad forced a laugh. "We understand. We're only concerned for her well-being. You understand, don't you, Naomi?" His eyes narrowed, fury glinting behind the feigned warmth. Celeste's nails dug deeper into my arm. "Sweetheart, you know we only want what's best." Grandpa would want us all to benefit. That word, benefit, hung in the air like poison. Inside, heat flared through me. I remembered every cold night in my car, every smirk across the dinner table, every time they called me a burden. And now here they were, trying to sink their claws into the one thing Henry had trusted me with. I didn't speak yet, but inside I was boiling. Derek leaned forward, his smirk returning. Think about it, Naomi. You're still renting. You've never owned a home, never made a real investment. $4 will bury you. Dad's been managing money his whole life. It just makes sense. I almost laughed. They still didn't understand. Grandpa hadn't left it to me out of pity. He'd chosen me because he knew I could rise above their greed. As their voices droned on, sweet poison wrapped in fake smiles, I sat straighter, silent, but burning inside. By the time I returned to my apartment that evening, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Text from Celeste. We should talk, sweetheart. Don't make rash decisions. Your father and I know what's best. I ignored them. For 2 days, silence. Then late at night, a knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Derek leaning casually against a frame, tailored jacket and that smug grin plastered across his face. Without asking, he walked in. Cute place, he said, glancing around my modest living room like it was a joke. But let's be real, Naomi, $4 billion and you're living here? Embarrassing. I crossed my arms. What do you want, Derek? He sprawled across my couch like he owned it. Simple. I'm here to save you from yourself. You've been living small for so long, you don't even realize what you've got. Dad knows money. Mom knows people. And me? I've got vision. Together, we could build something bigger than Grandpa ever dreamed. But only if you stop being stubborn. His words stung, not because they were true, but because they echoed every insult I'd heard growing up. Small, weak, stubborn. I don't need your help, I said firmly. Grandpa left it to me. Not you. Not them. For the first time, his smirk faltered. He covered it with a laugh, but I saw panic flash in his eyes. You really think you can handle this alone? Be smart, Naomi. Hand it over before you drown. I showed him the door. But Derek wasn't the only one. The very next day, Celeste appeared, letting herself in as though she still had keys to my life. She perched on a chair, smoothed her skirt, and gave me that syrupy smile. Darling, you've always been too sensitive. This money will ruin you. Let us shoulder the burden. I stared at her, remembering the night she smiled while they kicked me out. Her nails dug lightly into my arm, just as they had in the courtroom. Think of it as a family effort, she cooed. Grandpa would want us all to benefit. Benefit. Again, that poisoned word. When she left, I locked the door and sat in silence, chest tight. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe they're right. Maybe I can't handle this. But then I remembered Grandpa's eyes, steady and sharp. His voice echoing. You think before you act. That's not weakness, it's strength. That night I made a decision. No more playing defense. From now on, I'd document every word, every threat, every manipulation. If they wanted a war, I'd be ready. The first strike came quicker than I expected. I was at work when my phone buzzed. Mr. Lawson, the attorney. His voice was clipped, urgent. Naomi, I need to ask, did you authorize anyone to access the estate accounts? My stomach dropped. No. Why? He sighed. Someone presented themselves at the bank as your representative. They tried to withdraw funds. Fortunately, the will's stipulations flagged the attempt. The bank refused. But Naomi, they were insistent. I didn't need to ask who. I could already see it. My father's stern glare, my mother's sugary smile, Derek's arrogance, all fused into one desperate attempt. That night I drove past their house. The porch glowed warmly, 2 cars in the driveway, like nothing had changed. But to me, the sight was venom. They weren't just manipulative anymore. They were thieves. And as if that wasn't enough, they started a campaign of slander. Small towns run on whispers, and my parents knew it. Suddenly, at the grocery store, I felt eyes on me. A cashier muttered, "Must be nice, living off old money. At the gas station, I overheard. She stole it from her brother. That fortune wasn't meant for her. Even my closest friends began to pull away. Calls slowed. Invitations disappeared. The narrative spread. I was greedy, undeserving, a fraud. One night, sitting at my kitchen table, the weight crushed me. I had the fortune, yes, but it felt like a cage. If I used it, I'd prove their gossip right. If I stayed quiet, I'd drown in isolation. For the first time since the will reading, I doubted myself. Then I remembered something, an envelope tucked deep in a drawer. Grandpa had handed it to me on my 21st birthday, saying, "One day, you'll understand." Hands trembling, I opened it. Inside was a letter, his handwriting slightly shaky but strong. "Naomi, if you're reading this, it means the world has already tried to take what's yours. Don't let them. You are stronger than you believe, and one day you'll be forced to prove it. When that day comes, don't shrink. Stand tall. They can only steal from you if you give it away." Tears blurred my vision. He had known. He had prepared me. I folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and felt something harden inside me. Fear shifted into resolve. This wasn't survival anymore. It was war. The letter changed everything. For the first time, I felt Grandpa's presence not just as memory, but as guidance. His words echoed, "Don't shrink. Stand tall." So I started preparing. Quietly, methodically. The first step was finding someone I could trust with the financial side, someone outside my father's world. Through a coworker's recommendation, I met Marcus Green, a graying man with calm eyes and a worn leather notebook tucked under his arm. He didn't gawk at the billions. He didn't throw around jargon or flashy promises. Instead, he asked simple, steady questions. What do you want this money to mean? What are your fears? What are your goals? For the first time, I admitted aloud, I was terrified of drowning under the weight of it all. When our first meeting ended, Marcus slid a handwritten plan across the table. "Naomi," he said, gripping my hand firmly, "you're far more capable than you think. You just need someone to remind you." That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. With Marcus's help, I took deliberate steps. I bought a modest home. Not a mansion, not a palace, just a quiet place no one could ever throw me out of again. Walking through those bare rooms, I whispered to myself, "This is mine, truly mine." But money alone couldn't shield me. My parents' real weapon was influence, and gossip spread faster than fire. So I decided to fight the way Grandpa would have, by building respect. I joined a local nonprofit board Henry had once supported. At first, the whispers followed me. Undeserving, spoiled, fraud. But as weeks passed, people saw my consistency, my effort. They remembered Henry Carter's integrity, and, by extension, they began to see me in that same light. That was when I met Calvin Ross, a retired attorney in his 50s. He carried himself with a calm authority, sharp eyes that saw more than they said. When he learned I was Henry's granddaughter, something softened in his expression. "Your grandfather was a rare man," Calvin said, gripping my hand. "He spoke of you with pride." Over coffee a week later, he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Naomi, you should know, your grandfather anticipated trouble. He left protections in place." My breath caught. Protections? Calvin slid a worn folder across the table. Inside were documents I'd never seen before, ironclad clauses, notarized stipulations. If your parents or brother try to interfere, if they claim to represent you, they're automatically disinherited. Not just morally, Naomi, legally. I stared at the papers, my chest tight. Grandpa hadn't just left me money. He had left me a fortress. For the first time, I realized I wasn't on defense anymore. I had leverage. Calvin sat back, his tone calm but unyielding. "They believe you're weak. They don't realize you hold the stronger hand. When they overstep, and they will, you'll be ready." I walked out of that cafe with my shoulders squared, a new clarity burning inside me. My family wasn't just fighting me anymore. They were fighting Henry's foresight, my allies, and my determination. And sure enough, the escalation came. For weeks, my parents and Derek had circled like sharks, testing boundaries, sniffing for weakness. They tried manipulation, theft, slander. Nothing worked. So they aimed for the one arena they thought they could win, the courtroom. One brisk autumn morning, Calvin called me, his voice sharper than ever. They filed a petition this morning. Your parents and Derek are claiming you're unfit to manage the estate. They're requesting guardianship over your assets. I nearly dropped the phone. Guardianship? I'm 28 years old. That's their strategy, Calvin said grimly. They'll argue you're inexperienced, unstable, incapable. But remember, we've prepared for this. The hearing was scheduled the following week. The days leading up to it stretched like barbed wire. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me, neighbors whispering with pity or suspicion. My parents had poisoned the well. By the morning of the hearing, my hands trembled as I buttoned a simple navy suit. Nothing flashy. I wanted to look steady, not extravagant. Across the aisle, my parents and Derek sat like soldiers in formation. Celeste's smile syrupy sweet. Anthony's jaw tight with smugness. Derek glowing with arrogance, as though this was already won. The judge called us to order. Their attorney rose first, his words dripping with condescension. Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned for their daughter. While they grieve Henry Carter's passing, they cannot ignore the danger of handing a $4 billion estate to someone as inexperienced as Naomi Carter. She has no financial history, no assets prior to this inheritance, and a record of impulsive choices. It is only logical that her established parents step in to safeguard the estate. Derek nodded solemnly at each word, like it was rehearsed. Celeste dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Anthony stared at the judge with a practiced gravitas. It was theater, and they thought the court would buy it. Then Calvin stood. He didn't rush. His voice was calm, deliberate. Your Honor, this case is not about competence. It is about greed. Piece by piece, he laid out the evidence like hammer blows. The forged attempt at the bank. The text messages from Derek mocking my ability to handle money. Letters from my parents proposing I share the inheritance by funneling assets into their accounts. And finally, the stipulations in Henry Carter's will. Ironclad. Notarized. Explicit. No one but me was to manage the estate. The courtroom grew quieter with each revelation. My parents shifted uneasily. Derek's smug mask cracked when Calvin projected one of his texts onto the screen. $4 billion will drown you, Naomi. Better let Dad handle it. Then Calvin delivered the final blow. He held up Henry's old notebook, edges frayed from years of use. This was entrusted to me personally by Henry Carter. Inside are his notes, his foresight, his concerns. He anticipated this exact situation. Calvin flipped to the last page, reading aloud in Henry's steady hand. If they attempt to take what is not theirs, it will prove why I chose Naomi. She endured their cruelty, rose above their neglect, and proved stronger than they ever imagined. My estate is hers alone, not to be shared with those who cast her aside. The words rang through the chamber like a verdict before the verdict. I watched Celeste pale, her hand frozen mid-clutch of her pearls. Anthony clenched his fists. Derek's eyes darted to the floor. The judge leaned forward, her tone crisp and final. The petition is denied. The estate remains solely in Naomi Carter's control. Furthermore, this court warns the petitioners against further attempts to undermine the clear wishes of the deceased. This matter is closed. The gavel struck. It was over in less than an hour, but it felt like a lifetime. My parents' facade shattered. Celeste turned to me, her voice trembling with false warmth. Sweetheart, you don't understand how heavy this burden is. We only wanted to protect you. I stood calmly, steady in a way I hadn't been in years. No, you wanted to protect yourselves. Grandpa knew it. And now, so does everyone else. Her hand hovered, then dropped. Anthony muttered under his breath, but avoided my eyes. Derek stormed out, his heels striking the marble floor like gunfire. I walked out into the sunlight with my head high, the weight of years lifting. For the first time, I wasn't the exile, the failure, the scapegoat. I was the heir Henry had chosen, the one thing they could never control again. But I knew this wasn't the end. The legal war was won. The fallout was only beginning. It unraveled slowly, like dominoes tipping. Celeste's glittering reputation at the country club crumbled. Once the queen of gossip and brunch tables, she now walked into hushed whispers. We had no idea how she treated Naomi. Disgraceful. Anthony's downfall came at work. Word of the court case spread through his firm like wildfire. Clients backed away. Meetings were canceled. Within months, he was nudged into early retirement. For a man whose identity was tied to authority, it was a crushing blow. And Derek, the Golden Son's fall was the hardest. His entire image had been built on entitlement and charm. But once the fraud was exposed, invitations vanished. His girlfriend left. His so-called friends turned cold. Soon, he was back under his parents' roof, 3 broken egos feeding on each other's bitterness. Meanwhile, my life expanded. I poured myself into causes Grandpa had cherished. The nonprofit board grew, and I found myself in leadership roles. For the first time, people sought out my voice, not to dismiss it, but to respect it. I invested wisely, following Marcus's careful plan. My home became more than shelter. It became a promise to myself. Every time I turned the key, I whispered, "No one can throw me out again." The most powerful moment came quietly. One evening, I drove past my parents' house, the same house I'd been thrown out of at 18. The porch light was on, but the yard was unkempt, paint peeling, shutters faded. It looked tired, worn, like the people inside. I parked across the street. Memories washed over me. The night of my exile, the years of comparison to Derek, the endless sting of rejection. For so long, that house had been a monument to my failure. But now, staring at it, I felt clarity. They hadn't destroyed me. They had forged me. I rolled down the window, let the cool night air brush my face, and whispered words I'd never dared speak before. Grandpa was right. I decide what I'm worth. Then I drove away. In the end, Naomi's greatest victory wasn't measured in billions. They once held. It was in reclaiming her power. The real revenge, her voice, wasn't the billions in my account. She proved that no betrayal, no slander, and no courtroom battle could erase the strength her grandfather had always seen in her. What her family thought would break her instead became the fire that forged her into the woman she was meant to be. Speech balloon, what about you? Have you ever been underestimated, doubted, or pushed aside, only to rise stronger? Share your story in the comments below. Sparkles if this story inspired you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of courage, betrayal, and triumph. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't wealth or power. It's freedom.